In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Offer and Compromise DATL, which stands for Doubt as to Liability. Now, there are some people who believe that none of us should have to pay taxes, right? If you're one of those people, you earned the income, the IRS assessed you, friend, you owe the taxes. But there are situations when there is a legitimate dispute as to the existence of the tax liability, which is the amount that's owed, or the amount of the correct tax liability under the law. When this legit dispute exists, we have a doubt as to liability.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowen's podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowen's is America's favorite EA.
Welcome to episode 84 of the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowen's podcast. We are almost a month out from the tax deadline for individuals. Notices are coming in, letting people know that they have 2 weeks or so to make their payment. There are notices coming in with the intent to levy, the intent to issue a tax lien, and with the war going on, partial government shutdown, government or IRS doesn't have all the funding they need. Taxpayers, maybe you included, are concerned about how they're going to pay this tax liability when the economy is going ablaze. And in addition to that, there are some of you who owe and you don't want to pay because you don't want your tax dollars going to the war. Now, that part I can't help you with. However, I do want to present you with another potential option if you are in a situation where you owe the IRS, but some type of mistake has been made and you know within your heart of hearts that you don't actually owe them. All right. We have talked about the offer and compromise before, and when we did, we talked about what it was and how to qualify for one if you're looking at doubt as to collectability. But in case you don't know, breaking news, sometimes the IRS makes mistakes. Okay. And sometimes they assess you tax that you are not actually responsible for. When that happens, there is an option or a type of offer and compromise that you can submit that's called an offer and compromise DATL. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the offer and compromise DATL, which stands for doubt as to liability. Now, there are some people who believe that none of us should have to pay taxes, right? If you're one of those people, you earned the income, the IRS assessed you, friend, you owe the taxes. But there are situations when there is a legitimate dispute as to the existence of the tax liability, which is the amount that's owed, or the amount of the correct tax liability under the law. When this legit dispute exists, we have a doubt as to liability. Okay. So if you have a legitimate doubt that you owe part or that you owe none of the tax debt, you can complete the Offer and Compromise DATL booklet with Form 656L. Okay. Now, again, very similar to what we talked about before when we talked about the offer and compromise, because they're still going to ask you for some of the same background information. All right. Now, I will say that this option has been exhausted if the tax debt was established by a final court decision or a judgment concerning the existence or the amount of the assessed tax debt. Okay. So if you've already gone to court about it, it's too late to submit an offer in compromise DATL. But if you haven't gone to court about it and you've just been dealing with the IRS, then we still got time. Okay. Now, this sounds great. You have this legitimate concern, you have all the basis for the dispute. Just because you submit the offer doesn't mean that the IRS will accept your offer. Okay. Just as if somebody were to offer you something, you have the option to receive it or deny it. The IRS has that same option. But when you submit the offer, it begins a process where the IRS does have to evaluate it and take into consideration the things that you submitted on the form. If you supply the information to the IRS or you're responding to a notice related to the same matter, you need to make sure that you resolve anything outstanding that's connected to it. Okay. So let me give you an example. If, let's say, we have this tax debt that's been assessed and you don't believe that you owe it, but it's assessed because the IRS completed an SFR on your behalf. You need to make sure that you actually get your tax return filed so you're in actual tax compliance. Okay. Now, with that too, and this is an example that they give actually in the 656L instructions. If you are working with another area of the IRS, because yes, the system is antiquated, all the computer systems and departments don't talk to each other as seamlessly as they should. Sorry, but it's the truth. If you have an issue being worked on by another area in the IRS, so again, this is the example that the IRS gives in the instructions. So, for example, you've requested an audit reconsideration to resolve whether you're liable for the tax, then your offer needs to not be filed until that reconsideration is done. Again, IRS doesn't have all the funding they need. You don't want to tie up two different departments with the same matter. So if you're waiting for the audit reconsideration, that's a completely different department than the one that deals with offers and compromise. So that's why you would want to wait until the decision from that audit reconsideration because you may not even need to file this offer and compromise because the results of the audit may work in your favor, right? Now, you may want to have it prepared as a backup plan to submit if the audit results don't go in your favor, but you wouldn't want to submit it while the audit reconsideration is still outstanding. Okay. Excuse me. Now, with this, I do want to say that you don't want to use the DATL if you're just having a financial hardship and you don't think you'll be able to pay. That is what the 656L data to collectability is for. Okay. So when you're filling this out, they will ask questions like, have you already done the pre-qualifying tool? They'll ask questions like, why are you doing this? Is this going to be a data to collectability? So you don't think you'll be able to pay it back and it puts you in an undue hardship? Is it going to be effective tax administration or is it going to be doubt as to liability? Okay. You need to remember that this is a legal document that you're checking a box on and signing. So you want to make sure that you're actually telling the truth when we're submitting this form. All right. Now, after filling that out, you still have to substantiate your claim. Just like when you're filing a tax return and you have to substantiate the claim for the expenses that you have or for the credits that you're trying to claim. So Not only do you need documentation showing why you don't actually owe this tax, you also are going to need to show tax documentation as well, if applicable. I'll give you an example. I worked with someone, actually more than one someone, because this has been a recurring problem. I've worked with taxpayers who they had tax assessed to them because the IRS came back and said that they didn't report multiple six figures. Okay. And the tax professionals, because like I said, I've had this happen to more than one person over the years, they did not know how to respond to the IRS to say, hey, we did actually file everything. So what happened was when the taxpayer went to file, they gave their tax professional all of the financial statements, okay? But they did not give them all of the tax documents. Now, here's why this is important. They had been issued 1099Ks from their merchant services, right, that showed how much they used through certain payment systems and credit card companies. But in the financial statements, there was no breakout for that. So even though the amount on the 1099Ks was included within the financial statements and the profit and loss, the IRS went through and said, hey, you didn't report this 1099K. So not in all of them, but in most of the scenarios where I've seen this, the taxpayer had actually paid the tax due. The IRS was assessing the additional tax for a form that they were saying the taxpayer didn't report, but the taxpayer actually had. So this is just a freebie. I always tell people, it's great that it's included in your bookkeeping, no, and tax software, the way we are able to enter in a W-2 or a 1099 NEC. There's no spot in tax software like that for a 1099K. However, if you have 1099Ks, again, freebie, something I do, I break the number that's on the 1099K out from what's in the financial statements so I can have a separate line item. So I can have a 1099K for Stripe. I can have a 1099K for QuickBooks payments, right? For PayPal. So that the IRS can see right there, we did account for that money. So in an example like that, it's your responsibility to provide a written statement explaining why the tax debt is incorrect, all right, that they've assessed. So in the example I just shared, we would write to say, hey, this was actually reported. It was included in the financial statements. There's just not a breakout line for it in the tax return. And then I would show them the financial statements that were turned in. And then because most of them were using QuickBooks, they had a line item where it showed like where the payments were coming from and they had all been added up and it matched the 1099K again, but on the surface level, it was all added into incomes. There was no breakout. But by showing the 1099K, hey, we did receive it. Hey, that number is inside of there. Here's the QuickBooks report documentation to show that 1099K information is included in there. We were actually able in every situation except for one, because the taxpayer freaked out on me and left, we were able to get that rectified because it was reported. We had the documentation to support the story that we were telling the IRS, and the IRS was actually the one who had made the mistake that time. All right. Now, you may be thinking that's a lot of work. I don't want to do that. They already have all the proof, but they don't. And the less documentation you give them, well, let me go back. Documentation of any kind doesn't equal the right answer. The less information that you give them to tell the story, the more digging they do, and the likelihood of them rejecting the offer or finding something else goes up higher. Okay. So here's something to keep in mind. Not providing a written statement explaining why the tax debt is incorrect will cause your offer to be returned without further consideration. So we want to make sure that we get it right the first time and you have that included. Okay. Now, if you are currently in a bankruptcy, okay, you don't qualify to submit an offer at the time. Now, after the bankruptcy is completed, you could file your doubt as to liability. Again, if you went to court and the court made a final decision, the department that is processing your offer and compromise, they can't override what the court said. All right. So if you've already been to court on it, do not submit an offer and compromise. If your debt is litigation from the DOJ, you cannot include that and submit an offer and compromise. If you've already attempted to go the route of doubt as to collectability for the same tax period, then you, friend, cannot do a doubt as to liability. Now, with this, I gave an example with the 1099K, like when you should submit this. I'm sorry. There are other examples that typically deal with when the IRS has made a mistake. So, for example, um, again, I'll bring up the audit. If there was an audit reconsideration or audit and they came up on the wrong side of history of what actually happened, that provides the opportunity for you to submit the doubt as to liability. Okay. Now, with this, if you were thinking like, hey, does my situation actually qualify for this? There is a pre-qualifier assessment. And this assessment is 11 questions that they walk you through. They make sure that you understand that you must make an offer of at least $1, okay? And then you must provide a written statement explaining why the tax debt or part of it is incorrect. And you have to make sure that you provide that supporting documentation with your form 656, sorry, dash L. All right. Now, I know that I went over a lot of information in this episode. I know that I went over a lot of information that is probably new for a lot of you, and it can be overwhelming. If you have questions about this episode, this is the time where I will invite you to actually send me an email and inquire about this option to see if it's suitable for you. Because owing tax debt and not being able to pay can be humiliating. So, most of the time, I tell you drop your questions in the comments, but feel free to send me an email at tbowens, so TBOWENS at bowenstaxsolutions.com if you have a question about whether or not the offering compromise doubt as to liability is going to be a legitimate option for you. Now, you all know my thing. If you found this episode helpful, resourceful, will you please give us a rating on your favorite podcast platform? Will you share this with a friend or family member who may be dealing with the IRS and, maybe this will be a valid option for them? And then last but not least, thank you so much for listening to the episode. This show would not be a success if it weren't for you. So I appreciate you all for tuning in. every other week. I appreciate you all for sharing with people who may need this as a resource. And if you would like to see if you are a good fit to work with me to fight the IRS, you can book a consultation at www.bowenstaxsolutions.com. But whatever you do, remember, it doesn't have to be me. Just make sure that you get the help you need. All right? I'll see you all in the next episode. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.